The cloying scent of stargazer lilies filled my childhood bedroom, a fragrance that in my past life had symbolized joy, but now only reeked of impending doom. It was July 14th, 7 years ago, the day my engagement to Alexander Sterling was first publicly announced. In my original timeline, this day had been a blur of ecstatic phone calls, well wishes, and my younger sister Selena's saccharine, seemingly heartfelt congratulations. Now, the memory of her duplicity was a bitter, metallic taste in my mouth. I, Clara Thorne, stood rigidly before the antique cheval mirror. My naturally blonde hair, a shade of warm honey, framed a face that was still too guileless, too untouched by cynicism. Yet, within this youthful visage resided the hardened soul of a woman who had already endured a future of crushing poverty, public humiliation, and an endless, gnawing regret. All meticulously orchestrated by the very sister who was now tapping with feigned sweetness on my bedroom door. "Clara, darling? Are you quite ready? Alexander will be arriving any moment." Selena's voice, a deceptive melody of concern and barely concealed impatience, floated through the polished oak. Selena. My younger sister, by 2 years. With her striking raven hair, eyes that sparkled with dark ambition, and a preternatural ability to adapt to any social situation, she was everything I was not: audacious, calculating, and utterly devoid of genuine empathy. In my past life, she had masterfully woven a web of subtle lies around Alexander, poisoning his perception of me, subtly painting me as shallow, materialistic, and fundamentally unworthy of his affection. Her insidious campaign had worked with chilling efficiency. He had abruptly ended our engagement, claiming I wasn't the sincere, unpretentious woman he had initially believed me to be. Within a mere handful of months, he had married Selena, and together, they had ascended to the pinnacle of society, their union celebrated as a testament to their true and deeper connection. It was only much, much later, after my own life had unraveled into despair, that the shocking truth had been cruelly revealed. Alexander Sterling, the seemingly unassuming, struggling tech innovator, was, in fact, the secretly formidable CEO and true power behind Sterling Innovations, a global technology behemoth that had chosen to cloak its true ownership in layers of corporate secrecy. I had not only lost my fiancé but an entire future I had unknowingly forfeited. But now, fate had granted me an unimaginable gift, a second chance. I had been reborn, not into a new body, but back into my own, precisely at the precipice of my former undoing. Every stinging memory, every whispered betrayal, every moment of Selena's insidious machinations, it was all vividly clear, a meticulously detailed blueprint of the disaster to come. I strode to the door, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on my lips. "Coming, Selena. Just admiring the ring, you know." I held up my left hand, the modest silver band Alexander had given me catching the afternoon light. It was understated, elegant in its simplicity. He had always claimed to value authenticity and genuine connection over superficial displays of wealth. That was his carefully constructed persona, his impenetrable disguise. Selena swept into the room, her eyes, sharp as a hawk's, immediately darting to the ring, then to my carefully neutral expression. She was already probing, searching for any emotional tell, any weakness she could exploit. It's certainly simple, isn't it?" she mused, a sliver of barely disguised condescension in her tone. For the future Mrs. Sterling, I might have expected something a touch more substantial. A bit more dazzle, wouldn't you say? Alexander values intelligence and character over mere ostentation, I recited, echoing a line I remembered him using to describe his ideal partner. I watched her closely, my internal radar hyperalert. Her face flickered a brief flash of recognition, a momentary calculation. She knew his type, or at least, the type he presented to the world. This time, I vowed, I wouldn't allow her to snatch him away. Not without a fight and a new strategy. The melodic chime of the doorbell reverberated through the grand foyer below. My heart, despite my practiced calm, gave an involuntary leap. It was Alexander. But as I began my descent down the wide, curving staircase, my parents already beaming with anticipation in the spacious hall, I saw not one, but two distinguished figures awaiting us. Alexander Sterling stood there, impeccably dressed in a custom-tailored suit that exuded an aura of understated power, his quiet strength a palpable presence. Beside him, however, was another man. He was sprawled with almost insolent casualness on our antique velvet settee, his long legs stretched out, an expensive, artfully disheveled black jacket hanging open over a designer t-shirt. His hair, a mass of dark, tousled waves, framed a face dominated by a pair of startling, almost arrogant sapphire blue eyes that were lazily surveying our family's opulent living room with an expression of amused, almost bored indifference. This was Ethan Thorne. In my past, original life, I vaguely remembered him as Alexander's good-for-nothing childhood friend. He was the quintessential trust fund enfant terrible, notorious for his extravagant parties, his public gaffes, and his seemingly endless ability to squander his old money family's vast wealth. He was constantly portrayed in the tabloids as a charming disaster, forever borrowing money from the sensible Alexander, always managing to create a scene wherever he went. To all outward appearances, he was a delightful, charismatic screw-up, the polar opposite of the composed, serious Alexander. But the reborn Clara possessed a terrifying, exhilarating secret. I knew the truth. In the future I had narrowly escaped, years after Selina had successfully married Alexander, a desperate, drunken plea from my sister begging me for a loan after Alexander's empire had crumbled under unforeseen financial pressure, had inadvertently revealed a shocking, game-changing secret. Ethan Thorne wasn't a good-for-nothing at all. He was, in fact, the real Tycoon. His family's ancient, multi-generational fortune, the vast Thorne conglomerate, was even more immense and incomparably more powerful than Alexander's relatively young sterling innovations. Ethan's erratic behavior, his lavish, widely publicized parties, his carefully cultivated image as a public failure. It was all an ingeniously constructed, brilliant, and elaborate facade. He reveled in the freedom of being consistently underestimated, preferring to operate entirely under the radar while secretly pulling the strings in industries far beyond the tech world Alexander dominated. He was the ultimate hidden boss, the true puppet master, and I had learned that even Alexander, for all his visible power, secretly answered to Ethan on certain, crucial ventures. In my past life, I had dismissed him as a clown. Now, seeing him sprawled on our couch, radiating an effortless, almost insolent charm, I saw not a disaster, but my definitive ticket to power, my path to reclaiming what was stolen. This was my chance. This was the real Tycoon. This was the man I had to marry. Selina, however, with her usual unerring instinct for obvious targets, was already gravitating toward Alexander. Her dark eyes sparkled with a calculated adoration, her carefully practiced smiles aimed solely at him. She had already, quite predictably, decided that Alexander was the sole, obvious prize. Perfect. My plan could begin. The game, this time, was truly on. The air in the Thorne estate was thick with the scent of high-stakes theater. As the two men stood in our foyer, the contrast was jarring. Alexander was the picture of the perfect American success story. Reliable, stoic, and draped in the aura of a man who worked for every cent. Ethan, meanwhile, was the black sheep, checking his gold watch with a yawn that suggested our family's history was a dull bedtime story. In my first life, I had spent this evening clinging to Alexander's arm, trying to prove to him that I was the intellectual equal he claimed to want. I had ignored Ethan entirely, viewing him as a parasitic shadow. But as I reached the bottom step, I didn't look at my fiancé. I looked at the man on the couch. Ethan Thorne, I said, my voice projecting a warmth I had never shown him before. I didn't realize Alexander was bringing a guest. I hope our humble home doesn't bore you too much. Ethan's sapphire eyes snapped to mine. The boredom didn't vanish, but it was joined by a flicker of genuine surprise. Humble, he drawled, his voice a rich, sandpaper baritone. Most people would call this a palace, Clara. But then again, I've always found palaces a bit drafty. Beside me, I felt Selina stiffen. She was already positioned next to Alexander, her hand accidentally brushing his sleeve. She saw my interaction with Ethan as a mistake, a social blunder. She thought I was wasting my breath on the loser while she secured the winner. "Don't mind Ethan, Clara," Alexander said, his tone that of a tired older brother. "He's in one of his moods. We're actually here to discuss the merger announcement." "Of course," I replied, but as we moved toward the dining room, I made sure to walk beside Ethan. "I heard about your last venture, Ethan. The hotel in Macau? The press called it a lavish disaster, but I noticed the land value tripled after you sold it. That's a very clever way to fail." Ethan stopped in his tracks. For the first time, the smirk on his face wasn't a mask, it was a question. "You read the financial footnotes, Clara? I thought you were strictly a Vogue and social charities kind of girl." "People change," I whispered, leaning in just enough for him to catch the scent of my perfume, a crisp, expensive citrus, not the floral lace I used to wear. "Sometimes they even wake up." The dinner was a masterclass in manipulation. Selina was in top form. She spent the entire meal engaging Alexander in a deep discussion about renewable energy, a topic she had clearly spent all morning researching. She looked at him with an intensity that suggested his words were the only ones that mattered in the world. I saw Alexander's shoulders relax, saw the way he leaned toward her. He was falling for the soulmate trap she was setting. In my first life, this would have sent me into a spiral of jealousy and frantic overcompensation. Now, I simply watched. I was the silent observer, the pawn moving in a direction no one expected. "Ethan," I said, cutting through Selina's chatter. "I'm thinking of diversifying my personal trust. Everyone is betting on tech, but I have a feeling the real power is moving back to raw materials, lithium, cobalt. What does a good-for-nothing think about that?" Ethan swirled his wine, his eyes dark and unreadable. "I think a girl with those thoughts is either very lucky or very dangerous. Alexander, your fiancé is a lot more interesting than you led me to believe." Alexander laughed, a dry, dismissive sound. "Clara is a dreamer, Ethan. She probably read a headline on the way down the stairs." I saw the flash of irritation in Ethan's eyes at Alexander's condescension. It was subtle, but it was there. Alexander didn't respect Ethan, and more importantly, he didn't respect me. He wanted a trophy he could mold. Selina was giving him exactly that, a mirror of his own ego. As the evening wound down, the betrayal began to take its familiar shape. "Alexander," Selina whispered as we walked them to the door, her voice loud enough for me to hear. "I'd love to see those blueprints you mentioned. Perhaps I could drop by your office tomorrow? Clara is so busy with the wedding planning, I wouldn't want to bother her with boring business details." Alexander smiled, that warm, reliable smile that had once been my whole world. "That would be wonderful, Selina. It's rare to find someone who shares my passion for the technical side." They exchanged a look, a secret, shared understanding. In my first life, that look had been the beginning of my end. Now, it was the signal for my start. "Ethan," I called out as he followed Alexander to the car. "I'm hosting a small gathering at the gallery this Friday. Just a few friends and some worthless art. I'd love for you to come and offend everyone with your boredom." Ethan paused at the car door. He looked at Alexander and Selina, then back at me. A slow, predatory grin spread across his face. "I wouldn't miss it for the world, Clara. I've always enjoyed a good performance." The car pulled away, and the silence of the night settled over the Thorn estate. Selina turned to me, her face flushed with the triumph of a successful hunt. "Oh, Clara," she sighed, her voice dripping with fake pity. "Alexander is so intense. I was just trying to help him feel at home. You don't mind that I'm taking some of the boring work off your hands, do you? You should focus on your dress. After all, a Thorn wedding must be substantial." "I don't mind at all, Selina," I said, my voice calm and hollow. "In fact, I think you and Alexander are a perfect match. You both see exactly what you want to see." I turned and walked up the stairs, my heart pounding with a cold, electric thrill. Selena was hunting a prince who was actually a king's vassal. I was hunting a rogue who owned the kingdom. But as I reached my room, a shadow of doubt flickered. Ethan Thorne was brilliant, yes, but he was also cynical. He didn't trust anyone. To win him, I couldn't just be a reborn soul with a grudge. I had to become someone he couldn't afford to lose. The game was no longer just about revenge. It was about survival in a world where the good-for-nothing was the only person who could truly see me. The wedding season in the Thorne household was not a celebration, it was a tactical deployment. Within 3 months of that first dinner, the world had shifted on its axis. Selena's friendship with Alexander had blossomed into a scandalous, high-profile romance that left the tabloids breathless. She had played the role of the devoted, intellectual muse so perfectly that Alexander had broken our engagement in a flurry of "I'm sorry, but she truly understands my soul" speeches. In my first life, I had begged him to stay. I had screamed at Selena until my voice was hoarse. This time, I had simply handed him back the silver ring with a dignified nod and a single tear I had practiced for an hour in the mirror. "I just want you to be happy, Alexander," I had whispered. "Even if it's with her." 2 weeks later, I announced my own engagement to Ethan Thorne. The city gasped. My parents were horrified, convinced I was marrying a good-for-nothing out of spite. Selena, however, was delighted. She viewed my marriage to Ethan as my final surrender. A move into a tarnished cage while she moved into the Sterling Palace. The narrative our wedding was a quiet affair compared to the media circus Selena was planning. Ethan showed up with a flask in his pocket and a smirk that said he was only there for the free champagne. We were married in a small chapel, and as he slid a surprisingly heavy, unadorned platinum band onto my finger, he whispered, "You realize you've just signed up for a life of disappointment, right?" "I've always been an optimist, Ethan," I replied, meeting his sapphire gaze. We moved into his bachelor pad, a sprawling, disorganized penthouse that looked more like a tech startup graveyard than a home. There were half-finished blueprints on the floor, empty pizza boxes on the Italian marble counters, and a general air of expensive decay. For the first month, Ethan played his role to perfection. He stayed out late, came home smelling of expensive scotch, and slept until noon. He ignored me, waiting for the moment I would break, for the moment I would demand he get a job or act like a husband. I didn't break. I cleaned. I organized. I turned one of the spare rooms into an office and began quietly managing the trust fund my parents had tried to freeze. And every night, I left a single, high-level financial briefing on the kitchen island next to his morning coffee, reports on rare earth mineral shortages and the instability of the Sterling Innovations supply chain. One morning, at 3 a.m., I found him standing in the kitchen, the blue light of the refrigerator illuminating the report in his hand. He didn't look drunk. He looked sharp, his eyes devouring the data I had compiled. "Where did you get these numbers, Clara?" he asked, his voice no longer slurred. "These aren't from the public ledgers." "I have a good memory for details," I said, leaning against the doorway in my silk robe. "And I know how to read between the lines." Alexander is over-leveraged, Ethan. He's betting everything on the Phoenix processor, but the cobalt mines he's using are about to be nationalized. Selena doesn't know. She thinks she's married to a god. Ethan set the paper down and turned to me. The good-for-nothing mask was gone. In its place was the man I had died to find, the real Tycoon. "And why are you telling me this? To get back at her? Revenge is a side effect, Ethan. I want to build something. And I know you're the only person in this city who actually understands how the world works." He walked toward me, his presence overwhelming in the small space. "You're a strange creature, Clara Thorne. You married a man the world calls a loser, and you spend your nights tracking cobalt prices. What are you really after?" "I'm after a partner," I said, my heart pounding. "Someone who doesn't need me to be his mirror." While my home was a quiet battlefield of intellect, Selina's life was a gilded nightmare. She had married Alexander in a televised ceremony that cost millions. She was now the queen of tech, draped in diamonds and appearing on every magazine cover. But the crown was heavy. I saw her at a charity gala 2 months after our weddings. She looked stunning, but her eyes were darting toward Alexander, who was huddled in a corner with investors, his face a mask of stress. "Clara!" Selina chirped, gliding toward me, her hand resting heavily on a massive diamond necklace. "How is life in the penthouse? I heard Ethan was seen at the races again. Such a shame he can't find a hobby that doesn't involve losing money." "Ethan is happy, Selina," I said, sipping my champagne. "And Alexander?" "He looks a bit tired. Is the Phoenix project as stable as the press says?" Selina's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Alexander is a genius. He's just busy. Being a tycoon isn't for everyone, I suppose." "I suppose not," I agreed. As I watched her walk away, I noticed the way Alexander snapped at an assistant. The Sterling Empire was starting to crack. Selina had stolen the wealthy fiancé, but she had inherited a house of cards. She thought she was the winner, but she was living in a cage made of debt and Alexander's fragile ego. That night, when I returned home, Ethan was waiting for me. He wasn't on the couch. He was in the office I had built. "I made a few calls," he said, tapping the report I had written. "You were right about the cobalt. I just bought the mineral rights to the alternative supply in Canada. It'll be worth $1 billion by the end of the year." He stood up and walked over to me, handing me a glass of wine. "Consider it a wedding present." "$1 billion present?" I teased. "I told you, Clara," he said, his sapphire eyes locking onto mine with a terrifying intensity. "Palaces are drafty. I'd rather build something solid." For the first time since I was reborn, I felt a flicker of something real, not just strategy, but a connection. I had married the good-for-nothing to save myself, but as he pulled me into a kiss that tasted like wine and secret power, I realized I might have found the only man who could actually handle the woman I had become. But the phoenix was about to burn, and Selina was the type to set the whole world on fire before she admitted she had lost. The city of Oakhaven was a place built on the illusion of stability. High-rise buildings reached for the clouds, and the socialites moved with a grace that suggested they were untouchable. But beneath the surface, the foundations were rotting. The Phoenix processor, Alexander Sterling's crowning achievement, was failing its stress tests, and the market was beginning to smell blood. While Selina spent her days at high-end boutiques, trying to maintain the image of the billionaire's wife, I was deep in the trenches of a silent war. My life with Ethan had settled into a paradoxical rhythm. To the public, we were the tragic couple, the fallen thorn heiress and her drunken, spendthrift husband. But behind the closed doors of our penthouse, we were a high-functioning intelligence agency. Ethan's good-for-nothing act was becoming more elaborate. He would stumble out of high-stakes poker games at 4 a.m., making sure the paparazzi caught his disheveled appearance. But tucked inside his jacket would be a flash drive containing the internal memos of Alexander's desperate board members. "He's liquidating his personal assets to keep the stock price afloat," Ethan said one evening, tossing a jacket onto a chair. He looked remarkably sober for a man who had allegedly just finished 3 bottles of vintage Bordeaux. "Alexander is terrified. He's borrowed against the Sterling headquarters itself." I sat at the desk, cross-referencing the data. "He's hiding it from Selina. She just bought a second yacht. She's still playing the role of the tycoon's wife, oblivious that the stage is about to collapse." Ethan walked over, resting his hands on my shoulders. His touch was no longer the hesitant contact of a stranger, it was acclaim. "You've done enough, Clara. The trap is set. Why do you keep digging?" "Because Selina doesn't just want to win, Ethan," I whispered, looking at a photo of my sister on a digital tabloid. "She wants me to suffer. She won't stop until she thinks I'm in the gutter." I need to make sure that when she falls, she has no ground to land on. Ethan's grip tightened slightly. You're cold. I like that. The whispers in the wind began to turn into a gale at the Autumn Equinox Gala, the most prestigious event of the year. Selena had organized it, using it as a platform to announce the imminent success of the Phoenix project. She was draped in a gown made of liquid gold, her neck weighted down by the blue heart diamond, a sterling family heirloom. As Ethan and I entered, a hush fell over the room. Ethan stumbled slightly, leaning on me for support, playing the part of the embarrassing husband to perfection. "Oh, Clara," Selena cooed, gliding over with a glass of champagne. Her eyes were sharp, scanning me for signs of misery. "You look resilient. Though perhaps a bit tired? I suppose managing Ethan's adventures is a full-time job." "It has its challenges, Selena," I said, my voice sweet. "But at least I know exactly where my husband is. I hear Alexander has been spending a lot of time in late-night emergency sessions at the office. I hope he's not overworking himself." Selena's grip on her glass tightened. "Success requires sacrifice. Not that you or Ethan would understand that. Alexander is building a legacy." "What is Ethan building? A collection of empty bottles?" Suddenly, the room went dark. A giant screen at the end of the ballroom flickered to life. It was supposed to show the promotional video for the Phoenix processor. Instead, a series of internal emails began to scroll across the screen, emails from Alexander's lead engineers warning of catastrophic failure and the fact that the Sterling Empire was essentially bankrupt. The gasps were deafening. Alexander rushed to the stage, his face pale, shouting for the technicians to kill the feed. But the whispers were now a roar. The investors in the room were already on their phones, dumping Sterling stock. In the chaos, I looked at Selena. The Queen of Tech looked like a ghost. Her hand went to her diamond necklace, the symbol of her stolen victory. "This is a lie!" Selena screamed, her voice cracking. "It's a hack! Alexander, tell them it's a hack!" Alexander didn't look at her. He was staring at Ethan, who was standing perfectly straight now, his sapphire eyes cold and calculating. Ethan walked toward the stage, the crowd parting for him like the Red Sea. He wasn't the good-for-nothing anymore. He was the only man in the room who looked in control. "It's not a hack, Alexander," Ethan said, his voice echoing through the silent ballroom. "It's a foreclosure. I've spent the last 3 months buying up your debt." As of 5 minutes ago, the Thorn conglomerate owns 60% of Sterling Innovations. Alexander stumbled back, nearly falling off the stage. "Thorn conglomerate? You're a drunk, Ethan. You don't own. I own everything you tried to steal from Clara," Ethan said. I walked up to stand beside Ethan, my head held high. I looked at Selena, who was trembling, her liquid gold dress looking like a gilded cage. "You stole the wealthy fiancé, Selena," I said, my voice echoing for everyone to hear. "But you forgot one thing. A tycoon isn't the man with the loudest name. It's the man who holds the keys to the kingdom while everyone else is looking at the crown." Selena looked at Alexander, the man she had betrayed me for, and saw a broken, desperate man who had nothing left. Then she looked at Ethan, the loser I had married, and saw a king. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She let out a soft, choked sob, her hand falling from her diamond necklace. She had won the battle in the first life, but in this one, she hadn't just lost the war. She had lost her soul to a man who never really had the power she craved. But the unmasking wasn't over. As the police entered the ballroom to question Alexander about financial fraud, a final whisper began to circulate, one that involved Selena's own secret dealings to sabotage me 7 years ago. The web was unraveling, and the real tycoon was finally ready to take his throne. The aftermath of the Autumn Equinox Gala was a whirlwind of sirens and shattered glass. While Alexander was led away by federal agents for questioning regarding the concealment of corporate insolvency,
Selina stood in the center of the emptying ballroom, a gilded statue of ruin.
The liquid gold of her dress mocked her. She had dressed for a coronation but found herself at a funeral.
Ethan and I didn't linger to watch her weep.
We returned to the penthouse, the silence of the car a stark contrast to the chaos we had left behind. Inside the safety of our home, the good-for-nothing facade was officially retired. Ethan moved with a predator's grace, pouring 2 glasses of scotch as he monitored the global markets on his wall-sized screens. "Alexander is finished," Ethan said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "The board is voting to dissolve his remaining shares by morning."
But Selina, she's not like him. She doesn't just fold, Clara. She's going to look for a way to burn the house down with us inside.
"I'm counting on it," I replied, staring at the silver ring I had once worn, the one Alexander had used to pledge a love that was as hollow as his bank account. "She still thinks she has one card left to play."
Our parents.
Indeed, by dawn, the unraveling web reached our childhood home. Selina had fled to our parents' estate, weaving a desperate tale of how Ethan and I had sabotaged a genius for petty revenge.
My father, a man who valued the Thorn name above all else, was furious.
He summoned me to the estate, threatening to disown me for humiliating the family and attacking the man who was supposed to be his son-in-law. When I arrived, the air in the parlor was thick with my father's rage and Selina's artificial tears. She sat on the velvet settee, her eyes red-rimmed, looking every bit the victim.
"How could you, Clara?" my father thundered. "To marry a drunk and use him to destroy a man like Alexander? You've shamed us."
I stood in the center of the room, unmoving.
"I haven't shamed anyone, father.
I simply stopped a criminal from dragging our family name into his bankruptcy."
And as for Selina, she didn't just marry Alexander. She helped him.
I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder of documents, the final pieces of the web.
These are the records of the secret accounts Selina opened in our family's name to hide Alexander's debts. She didn't just steal my fiancé.
She risked your legacy to fund her vanity.
My father's face went pale as he looked at the signatures. Selina's sobbing stopped instantly.
Her face shifted from the victim to the predator, her eyes flashing with a cold, desperate light.
It was for the family. Selina screamed, standing up.
"I was trying to make us the most powerful name in the country."
Alexander was the tycoon. Ethan is nothing but a shadow. Is he?
The doors to the parlor opened. Ethan stepped in, dressed in a sharp black suit, his presence filling the room with an undeniable authority. He didn't look like a man who spent his nights at the races. He looked like the man who owned the track.
"Mr. Thorn," my father stammered, his anger vanishing into confusion.
I thought you were.
You thought I was exactly what I wanted you to think," Ethan said, walking to my side and placing a protective hand on my waist.
"It's a very effective way to see who your true friends are. Your daughter Clara was the only one who saw the man behind the bottle. Selina, on the other hand, saw only a prize she could steal." He turned his sapphire gaze to Selina.
"I've spent the last few hours reviewing the files you tried to delete, Selina.
7 years ago, when you were just a teenager, you didn't just fall in love with Alexander.
You blackmailed him.
You found out about his first failed startup and threatened to tell me, the man who was funding him.
You forced him to choose you over Clara to keep his secret safe."
The room went deathly silent. My heart felt like it had been pierced by a shard of ice.
In my first life, I thought Alexander had left me because I wasn't enough. I died thinking I was a failure.
But the truth was even more tragic. I was a casualty in a game of blackmail Selina had started before she even knew how to love.
You knew? I whispered, looking at Selina. Selina didn't deny it.
She let out a sharp, hysterical laugh.
"Of course I knew.
You were always the perfect one, Clara.
The one everyone loved. I wanted to see you broken. I wanted to see you crawl. And it worked. You married a loser.
I married the real Tycoon, Selina, I said, my voice as cold as the grave I had once occupied.
And I didn't do it by blackmailing anyone. I did it by being the only person who actually protected him.
Ethan stepped forward, his voice a final judgment.
The police are waiting outside, Selina. Not for Alexander's fraud, but for the embezzlement you committed using your father's name. You wanted a kingdom? Now you have a cell.
As the officers entered and Selina was led away, her screams of "it wasn't supposed to be like this" echoing through the halls of our childhood, my father sank into his chair, a broken man.
I looked at Ethan. The web was fully unraveled.
The revenge was complete.
But as I saw the sadness in Ethan's eyes for the betrayal of his childhood friend, I realized that reclaiming a kingdom wasn't enough.
We had to rebuild our hearts.
Is it over? I asked.
Ethan took my hand, his grip warm and solid.
No, Clara. For us, it's just the beginning. But the final resolution was yet to come.
To truly be free of the past, I had one more person to face, Alexander, the man who had traded his soul for a secret. The glass walls of the high-security visitation room felt like a barrier between two different dimensions. On one side sat Alexander Sterling. The Prince of Tech was gone, in his place was a man in a rough orange jumpsuit, his skin sallow and his once confident shoulders slumped in defeat. On the other side sat I, Clara Thorne, draped in a coat of midnight wool, the weight of the real Thorne Empire resting comfortably on my shoulders.
Alexander picked up the receiver, his hand trembling.
You came to gloat, he said, his voice a ghost of the resonant baritone that had once swayed boardrooms. To see the man who stole your life behind bars.
I came to see the man who traded me for a secret, I replied, my voice calm and devoid of the bitterness that had once consumed me. Ethan told me everything, Alexander. About the blackmail. About Selina.
I spent a lifetime, 2 lifetimes, actually, wondering what was wrong with me.
I just wanted you to know that I finally realized it was never about me at all. It was about your fear. Alexander looked down, a single tear tracing a path through the stubble on his cheek.
She was relentless, Clara.
Selina, she didn't love me.
She loved the shadow I cast.
And Ethan. I never knew. I thought he was just a fool with a trust fund.
That was your mistake, I said, standing up.
You looked at the surface and ignored the soul. Ethan didn't need to be a tycoon to be a man. But you needed to be a tycoon just to exist.
I hope you find who you are when there's nothing left to buy.
I walked away without looking back.
The final thread of my past life was severed. The winter air was crisp and clean.
Ethan was leaning against a sleek black sedan, the engine purring like a tamed beast. He didn't ask what was said. He didn't need to. He simply opened the door for me and took my hand. The merger is complete, Ethan said as we drove toward the city skyline. Sterling Innovations is now a subsidiary of Thorne. We've redirected the Phoenix technology to power sustainable energy grids for the public sector. The empire is finally doing some good. And Selina? I asked.
She's facing 10 years for the embezzlement, Ethan said, his voice stern but fair.
Our parents have gone into a quiet retirement.
The Thorne name is back in your hands, Clara.
What do you want to do with it? I looked at the man beside me.
The good-for-nothing who had become my everything.
I want to build a palace that isn't drafty, Ethan. A home where the truth is the only currency.
The happy ending 3 years later, the Thorne Sterling headquarters stood as a beacon of the new Oakhaven.
But the real kingdom was a beautiful, sun-drenched estate on the coast.
In the garden, a toddler with golden hair and sapphire blue eyes chased a golden retriever through the grass, her laughter echoing against the sound of the waves. Ethan stood on the veranda, a charcoal suit replaced by a comfortable sweater, a glass of lemonade in his hand. He watched our daughter with a look of such pure, uncomplicated love that it brought tears to my eyes.
You're thinking about it again, aren't you? Ethan asked, stepping up behind me and wrapping his arms around my waist. The first life. Sometimes, I whispered, leaning my head back against his chest. I think about how lucky I was to die, just so I could find the life I was actually meant to live. I married a good-for-nothing and found a king. And I, Ethan said, kissing the top of my head, met a broken heiress and found the only woman who could ever truly see me. We didn't just reclaim a kingdom, Clara. We built one that can't be stolen. As the sun set over the ocean, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold, I finally felt the weight of the past lift entirely. I was no longer the reborn soul seeking revenge. I was Clara Thorne, wife, mother, and partner to the real Tycoon. The web was gone. There was only the light. What an incredible journey of second chances and hidden truths. Clara's story reminds us that the people we often overlook might be the ones holding the keys to our greatest happiness. Revenge might have started the fire, but it was love and authenticity that built the empire. If you had a second chance at life, would you seek revenge on those who wronged you, or would you focus on finding your own true tycoon? Let's talk about it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this saga of betrayal and triumph, please show your support for the channel. Like this video, share it with a friend who loves a good twist, and most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a soul-stirring tale from Cinematic Audio Stories. Thank you for being part of our story. Until next time, remember, keep your eyes open, the real treasure is rarely where you expect to find it.